I wanted to create a world where anyone could have access to delivery with drones.
In the drone, there is the mechanical part and the software part. These are all autonomous. So that means the moment they leave your hand or your warehouse, they're really gone. And then they drop whatever they're carrying, then they come back to you. So what part have you focused more on in this?
In a world where everything is autonomous, you can't win by being more autonomous than your competition. What you do win with is by having stronger unit economics than your competition. We really want to turn drones into the universal form of delivery, the universal form of logistics.
Naman, thank you so much for joining me. So we've already been talking a little bit, and I find your story quite fascinating. And also the fact that you dropped out of college, or you never went into college, but moved straight from school into a startup, and which is about 3 years old now. So what you're trying to do essentially is to deliver more efficiently using drones, which are actually a combination of drones and fixed wing aircraft.
Yeah.
So my question is, how did you start on this particular problem statement? Why did you say that, okay, I want to build something which is going to do this?
Yeah, and I think the reality with most startups is just that it ends up being an evolution, right? I think over time, as you grow, you understand what it is that you're doing. I think a big luxury that I had, and I think that also taps into how Airbound is run as a company, is the fact that while the company is 3 years old, I started working on this about 5.5 years ago as a project while I was still in school. And so there is honestly more of just an exploration into drones, right? Of just saying, hey, how can we make efficient drones? How can we make drones that require less infrastructure to do deliveries? I was heavily inspired by, global leaders like Zipline in the space, and just wanted to do something to just generally...
So Zipline works in Africa. They deliver medicines and so on over longer distances, yeah.
Yes, precisely. And I think it was that model that I found really interesting, because before then, look, everyone had heard of like Amazon's Prime Air delivery programs and all, and that never excited me, right? It just felt like, okay, this is a very incremental improvement. You get your Amazon packages delivered to you a bit faster. Like I couldn't really care about that. The Zipline use case was really exciting because you created a new dimension for deliveries. You created this dimension of access where they were able to now enable deliveries in more remote areas that otherwise did not have access to deliveries. And at that time, I was just really, I think, enchanted by that vision, and I wanted to contribute more to it. I wanted to create a world where anyone could have access to delivery with drones. And, I think as we're sort of scaling up, and, as I also better understood what the company is supposed to be, we realized that eventually evolved into the vision that we have today, where we really want to turn drones into the universal form of delivery, the universal form of logistics.
Okay. Now, in the drone, there is the mechanical part and the software part. These are all autonomous. So that means the moment they leave your whatever hand or your warehouse, they're really gone. And then they drop whatever they're carrying, then they come back to you. So what part have you focused more on in this?
So I think that's sort of the interesting insight behind Airbound. Like and I wouldn't say this is like sort of, me having some crazy market insights at 15. At the end of the day, I'd say we started focusing on the hardware because I just really love hardware. But broadly, sort of looking back, it comes down to the mistake that I think people often make is that we look at drone delivery, it's essentially autonomous aerial deliveries. And I think that's a very compelling vision. And we already have aerial deliveries, but there's just so much human labor involved in that. It becomes crazy expensive, right? What happens if we could automate all of it? And so people really focus on the automation aspect. I think what we realized is that while automation is the unlock, automation is not the differentiator. In a world where everything is autonomous, you can't win by being more autonomous than your competition. What you do win with is by having stronger unit economics than your competition. And I think what we realized here is just that the fundamental, manufacturing and the way you build an aircraft is broken. Right now, I use the term aircraft here is, and I think we've sort of touched upon this slightly, is that what we're building is not quite, the traditional drone that you would imagine, right? It's not your DJI quadcopter, it's not your wedding camera drone or your toy drones. And I think
you have 2 propellers as opposed to 4.
Yes, but that's just, I'd say the main difference here is the fact that I'd say drones essentially have two classes. A drone is any autonomous aerial vehicle. You have your quadcopters and all, which hover to stay in the air, and then you have your fixed wings, things like planes, etc., which use lift from their wings to stay in the air. And we are in the latter category, right? We use vertical takeoff and landing to be able to take off and land without needing a runway like a plane does. But at the end of the day, for most of our flight, we fly the same way a plane does. And while I would say we have largely solved and optimized for what a quadcopter should look like, what that design architecture is, nobody in the world has really figured out what the design architecture for small fixed wing aircraft should look like. We figured it out for passenger planes. We haven't figured it out for small vehicles like this. So we've really innovated on getting that system architecture together. And we've also really innovated on the composites. So making things out of, carbon fiber, because it's a whole other class of material. And I'm happy to do like a 1 hour session on carbon fiber if you really want me to. But I think broadly the results that we've achieved is we have a 1.4 meter wingspan aircraft where the entire structure weighs about as much as my phone does. We have parts where you can see how light they are by just dropping them and watching them float down, right? And I think there's something magical about seeing that with structural components. You wouldn't imagine something to be as light as, the sheet of paper that you're carrying, yet be as strong as a steel bar. But that is effectively what we.
So where do you find these?
So that's the thing. It's less about finding; it's more about creating. Like I think one fundamental insight that is sort of obvious when you look at it is structural strength is all about shape, right? You can say that, like for instance, why is carbon fiber so strong, but why is your pencil lead so weak? At the end of the day, they're both made out of carbon. It comes down to the intermolecular shapes that they form, right? Graphite is essentially a series of sheets that can easily slip across each other. Carbon fiber is a continuous chain. And, we have shapes at the molecular level. We also have shapes at the level of meters, right? Like how are buildings constructed, right? Why do you have columns and beams and all of these interesting shapes? Because if you just try to make, a building the way, like, let's say this table is made, it would collapse under its own weight. And the same way we look at it at a millimeter level scale. How can you create interesting shapes out of these materials that are not possible with manufacturing methods available to metals, right? In the most like reductive way, the way I describe like what composites are is that it's a cloth and you apply glue to it, right? If you spill some super glue on your shirt, congrats, you made a composite. We just do that with stronger cloth and stronger glue. But that's really all there is to it. And this is a very fundamentally different way to how you make things out of metal. And while you cannot make certain metal parts out of it, right? Like I cannot make an I-beam out of this. I cannot, let's say, liquefy it and form it into different shapes. I can also drape it in certain ways that I could never do with metal. I can combine this with other materials like foams, creating very thin layers of carbon, surrounding.
Do you have foam on your drones?
Yes, we do. So we use a lot of structural foams there. And it's really, I'd say the magic is in the way you
combine. So this will be the strong foam like Elapod or...
Yeah. So there's some specialized foams that we use for this application. Foam is again a very broad term. And that's there. It's when you're able to combine foam or just broadly any what you call a core material. It's a material that is very lightweight and has good properties, let's say in compression, but you only need good properties in one axis. That can sort of push apart your carbon fiber. It helps increase, broadly the moment of inertia, etc. It essentially makes your structures thicker.
Got it.
And you can combine that with carbon in some really interesting ways to make some crazy lightweight structures.
And what kind of weight does your prototype at this point, which I understand you're also likely to work with someone or an organization to deliver goods? I don't know. I'm assuming it's medicines. What is the kind of weight they can carry? How long can they fly? And they have to come back, I'm assuming.
Yes. So currently we're looking, we move up to 1 kg in payload. And these drones have a range of around 30 to 37 kilometers in flight. So this is sort of where we're
sort of 18 going and 18 coming back.
Yes. Or again, it depends on the way you're building out these use cases. I think it can also just be like, let's say 31 way, because what we're trying to push for is that we don't want people to see drone delivery as just this last mile solution. We are just fundamentally solving for the movement of atoms in general. And that means that, the eventual goal here is that we don't just want to compete with scooters. We want to compete with trucks. We want to compete with buses. We want to compete with any vehicle that travels on the road.
And the scanning stuff.
Exactly. Right. And I think that's that's precisely where, you see a lot of different mid-mile applications where the drone can land at both locations. A lot of the pilots that we're doing, the drone can land at both sites because there's still a lot of value in that. And that way you can extend the operational range of your system by a lot.
Got it. So, if it's going 18 kilometers and coming back, that's a fair distance to cover.
Yeah.
In most cases, the challenge, I guess, and I'm sure you get asked this question all the time, is the regulation. And so, what can you do? What do you think you could do from a regulatory point of view? What do you think would you be allowed to do? And how do you think we could move forward as a country here?
So I think there's broadly two classes that you care about with regulation. One is what airspace you're in. So India is broadly divided into red, yellow, and green zones. So I think one great thing that the government has done is that India is default green. So you define some red and yellow zones, but everything else is green. So there's a lot of area that is green, but a lot of areas where economic activity happens ends up being red or yellow. Why is this the case? Because let's say you have yellow zones stretching as far out as 12-kilometer radius around any airport. Now, where there's economic activity, there will be airports, and you broadly also have a lot of red zones around defense establishments. Now, these are a few things that we want to see how we can get better at to really scale up drone delivery. To say that, look, at the end of the day, if I am creating a platform that is clearly in the loop with the government where they can keep tabs on all of my aircrafts, know where they're going, I should be exempt from some of these things, right? These military red zones really exist so that some random person cannot go out flying with a DJI drone and accidentally, film a military base. Right? We obviously wouldn't want that. But if we are able to provide enough documentation to show that, hey, there is no national security risk to our drones, we have enough, enough encryption and all of these features to ensure that they cannot also be misused by anyone else, we should be allowed to fly over these zones. We should be, if we have clear flight maps and all, able to fly closer to airports, right? Because the reality is that, 8 to 12 kilometers away from an airport, any aircraft is more than 2 kilometers up in the sky. We're getting nowhere close to that, right? And so we want to see how we can start to access more and more of these areas. The other more critical...
So China calls it the low altitude economy, right?
Yes, it is very important, right? And I think it, when these rules were initially made, there just were not enough applications for drones yet to really make sense to push for, hey, we need to come closer to airports and all. But now that is starting to change. And I think we really want to see how regulations can evolve to be even more liberal than they already are.
And what's the kind of targets that you've set for yourself? And are you funded already for that? Or are you planning to raise more? Or?
I think sort of it's, the way I frame it is just for startups, capital is oxygen. It's not all you need to survive, but you damn well can't live without it. So I think broadly capital is always very helpful to us. And, I think we're in a position where we've been able to attract capital fairly well. I would say broadly on targets, it's a bit of it's actually a bit of a fuzzy thing when you're getting deep into tech development, right? And I think we strongly believe in not building a company that is, very, very strongly held towards short-term revenue or profitability targets, because I think that just flies in the face of innovation. But certain things internally that have been very useful for us to look at is, hey, what is the rate at which we're making drones? How many drones have we come out with? What is the rate at which we're flying aircrafts, right? How many deliveries have we done? How are we really scaling up all of these numbers? Because in my eyes, this is the bread and butter of our business. If we solve for this, revenue will come, profitability will come. That is obvious. But if we can't solve for this, then you're kind of dead on arrival.
Okay, last question. So I'm sure a lot of parents would be watching this. And the first question they would ask is, what did your parents say when you said you're going to drop out of school?
Yeah, it was definitely quite interesting. So I don't know why, but I honestly I ended up having this conversation with them when I was 15. I don't know, there was just something in me that was just like, if this works out, I don't want to go to college. So I think it helped that by the time we actually had to get to that decision, they were very primed. Their perspective was also that, I think they wanted to understand whether this was serious or not, right? Whether this was just a random project I would ditch.
Because the first thing any parent would have said is, at least go get a degree and then do the same thing.
Exactly, right? And I agree. That was their thought process as well. I think eventually sort of what they relented to was that, hey, if you if you can get some funding on this, right? Like if you can get someone to really give you money for this and take an equity stake in your company, have a financial interest in you, then we'll consider it. Then it could make sense. Because I think at the end of the day, what every Indian parent is worried about is that we're a country with 1.4 billion people, right? It's really easy to dissolve into the crowd. And that's it. If you don't even have a degree to differentiate yourself, what will you do? And I think that's what I really had to prove to them, that, hey, I'm doing something that's differentiated enough. I found a way to really meaningfully differentiate myself from the rest of the world without having a degree. And I think that's also what they saw. What also helped is that I applied to colleges internationally, so I could take a gap year. And I think in that gap year was when, we'd raised $1.5 million. And I think at that point you sort of get to a place where it's serious enough that they're like, okay, give this a shot. I think now thankfully I've like already gotten to a place where I know even if Airbound were to crash and burn today, I am in a much stronger position than I would be having a degree from even the most elite institutions in the world.
Yeah, and I'm sure it won't crash and burn. I'm sure it'll fly to and soar to newer heights. Greater heights. Naman, all the best and thank you so much.
Absolutely. It was lovely chatting with you.
Thank you.